We are People Nerds. Thanks so much for joining us. If you haven't joined or thought about joining People Nerds, we have an event every year. We're really excited about it. It's later this fall in September in San Fran. If you are interested in joining us, we'll link some more information about that. And you didn't miss much, just the most important part, that is the illustrious guests that are our speakers here. So we've got Roz and Casey. They're from the studio. They're in Innovation Lab here at Dscout. I am the bumbling fool who gets to ask them smart questions and they'll respond with smarter answers. So Roz, Casey, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Yeah, my name's Rosalind Koff. I've been at Dscout for about a year as a research lead on the studio team. And prior to my experience here, I spent a while at a large 80-year-old research organization where I ran a lot of public opinion, government, and academic work. I fielded a ton of quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods research. And I worked on an innovation team there that was trying to move traditional methods a little bit forward. So super excited to be here to talk mixed methods with y'all today.
Yeah. I'm Casey Oberlin. I'm coming from academia. I've been at Dscout now for a little under 6 months, so it's still kind of new to the industry, but I'm excited. I have a PhD in sociology, and I was an assistant professor at a college before where I taught then a variety of mixed methods courses and conducted mixed methods research, particularly on topics related to healthcare.
So she's always keeping me on my toes when I'm like, hey, I ran this project this way. She'll rein me in and correct me for the real way to do it.
And Roz gives me all the applied, realistic, this is what we need to do in this context.
Yeah. Cool. So I think first we'll probably start off talking about what mixed methods are. Casey, you want to give us a little bit of an overview?
I'm ready for it. So thinking about mixed, there's kind of a key part of like, we identify mixed methods as something that's qualitative and quantitative. So this is different than when you're using multiple types of data, which could be qualitative or quantitative in one project. So this is where you have a lot of disciplinary, but we're talking about it today. We joining together the strengths of qualitative and quantitative approaches. And the main goal is to really think about how can I triangulate these types of data. Right? And triangulation is just meaning that you're bringing together different types of data to be able to address a question you have more effectively.
Yeah, and in our day-to-day, we'll have customers come to us with burning methods, or burning questions, but they're not always sure the method to go about that work. And so it's super fun to really prioritize your key questions and think about, all right, what is the best method or methods that I can pair with this versus saying, I'm a quant person and I'm definitely going to run these through in a quantitative way, kind of regardless of what the best fit might be.
Right. It's always about what's the best tools for the job rather than just being fixed in like one lane. It's definitely a way we both approach our work.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And I share, again, sorry for the echo and everything. Hopefully it sounds fine now. Casey and I were talking a few weeks ago about mixed methods, and one of the things that I always liked about them, I didn't get to use them a lot in my background. I was more stats, quantitative, experimental, but it always helped me see more of the picture when I could use, launch a great big survey, get some incidents and frequencies of whatever I was looking at.
Totally.
And then even if I did like 10 interviews, I would get so much more richness and nuance, which is part of the clarion call for Dscout and what you all do at the studio. Triangulation is the phrase that I hear a lot. We're trying to use various different data points to see the best view of things. So I think that is what I'm hearing from y'all here.
And it paints a bigger picture of the insights that you're getting out of your work. It gives you more confidence in what you're seeing in your data. But it also makes for more compelling storytelling for when you're actually sharing those insights with people who don't share your fellow research hat. So sometimes that means multimedia. Sometimes that just means painting a fuller picture of what you're hearing from users. And just like you said, Ben, that coupling of kind of qual and quant to show the full picture of what's happening is super helpful. I also think that mixed methods, so the triangulation happens like definitely in the data, you're hitting it from multiple perspectives, but that inherently involves like a variety of people and their training and their perspectives on your research questions too. So the triangulation is both in storyline and insights, as well as getting the right stakeholders, getting the right perspectives in the room to really target your research.
Which I think is a great point, because you don't need to be able to do it all as one researcher, right? So it's really about who's on your team or who can you partner with that can can help you bring their skill set to the table. And I think that's something that I enjoy the most about mixed methods research is it's always kind of by nature collaborative.
Yeah, and a brief thing that I didn't get to mention, and again, this is on me, y'all. The Ben from People Nerds really dropped the ball here, so thanks for sticking with us. If you have a question, please use the Q&A box. Roz and Casey and I are going to try to answer as many as we can. We won't be able to get to them all, and so we'll have follow-up information for y'all. If there's something that we aren't able to answer on air, Casey and Roz will be able to holler at you offline. So please use that Q&A button, and then you can upvote questions if there's something in particular that you like. Thank you, Lewis, for example, for just posting yours in there. I really appreciate that. Okay, it feels like mixed methods is one of those tautological concepts where you're like, well, it's when you mix your methods, right? Like, yeah. So I think that's a really nice way of talking about qual and quant or different sorts of training is, I think, really useful because a lot of folks who join People Nerds on these webinars are from various backgrounds. So let's go to when you might use a mixed methods approach. Let's just say broadly. Can we start with like the questions or the cases or the outcomes that maybe are best suited for mixed methods? When might you use something like that, an approach?
Sure. I think I kind of like to think about it as two general approaches where you're either trying to confirm something, right? So you've done either maybe, let's say, a large scale survey, but you're not sure if the validity, if it's really holding up, is that true or is it an artifact of the sample, the large sample that you have? Or when you think about the other way of qualitative, where you've interviewed maybe 20 people, but you don't know if this is at all a pattern that will hold up. So I think this is something that, like, are people really optimistic about the role of tech? You want to know that from a different vantage point and confirm something that you already have data on. The other approach tends to be more complementary. So you're extending existing work, but you have no way to really address it with your current data. So that's where you're trying to address a gap. So this tends to be more, I think, when going from qualitative to quantitative to qualitative. You can't get at the bigger why and how this works. And so that's another way you can kind of really target, we don't know much about this issue, and we want to be able to expand that more. And that's when you can really think about who else could help us for this mixed methods approach. So I think kind of the confirmation or complementing are two different general overview approaches.
Yeah, and like in an ideal world, we set out from the beginning of our research and we're like, hey, we really want to do this thing, and we see exactly cleanly and clearly how we'll set a mixed method study up.
Yeah.
In practice, I've often found that I'll go out and I'll do a large quantitative effort or a large qualitative effort, and I'll come back and I'll be like, man, I have more questions than I started with, or I'm seeing this particular group of users act in a way that I did not anticipate. Why is that happening? And that's often how that extra method will get tied in. It's like, I got more questions that I started with, and I really want to understand why I'm seeing this pattern of behavior.
Right. And it's so fun to be able to, that's the thing with the messy part, right? Of digging into it, knowing you have tools, you feel more validity, you feel like you trust your data more, but it is never a clean and neat process in my experience.
Yeah, we've got Janet asks, so mixed methods is identical in meaning to hybrid methods or multi-methods?
Those are often languages. I mean,
yeah. So I would say yes, as a kind of more practitioner, less grounded, like don't have my PhD. For sure, if we're talking about a mixed methods approach, I would say multi-methods or hybrid approach. I feel like if you went to a textbook and you looked at the differences, there is a difference between mixed and multiple methods. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think how it's used disciplinary-wise would vary.
Yeah.
So even across different textbooks.
Super fair.
So I think what I've seen most common, though, is multi-method might be, again, like you could have different types of qualitative approaches.
Yep.
So you could be doing different types of interviewing or different types of content or textual analysis combined then with interviews, right? So it's not necessarily always meaning that you're going across this old, kind of really outdated mode of thinking qualitative versus quantitative. That is definitely not what we're about, and that's, I think, definitely not what's captured by mixed methods.
Yeah, and I think from the folks I get to talk to at the UXR and design thinking conferences, it's largely like qual and quant, right? Like, folks can become very silent in Roz. We're going to talk a little bit more about bridging those gaps. But I think a lot of folks feel like they're, quote, doing mixed methods if they're partnering with someone in data science, which is very valuable. Like, okay, I did all these great ethnographic work, and I'm seeing this thing.
Yeah.
Can I confirm it or support it in the big data backend work? And so I think it can be more nuanced, as you said, Casey, when you're doing maybe two different kinds of interviewing, and then you follow up with a diary study.
Right.
They're all, quote, qualitative,
right,
but you're asking things in slightly different ways, and you're shifting the prism. I don't know. And to when you would use them, like whenever I've used them historically, I did just what you said, Roz. Like you go in thinking, okay, hopefully this great big survey or observational study will do this thing. And then I get something I had no idea would come up. And like, well, I can't keep going with a survey. I need to visit a home or observe someone do a thing or bring someone into a lab. And so when I use it is when I need it. I can never say that there is like, oh, that question is definitely mixed methods.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know if best case scenario, unlimited resources, you would use mixed methods for every question that a customer has that comes through your door at the studio. Like they have unlimited resourcing and time, which we know is rarely the case. Would you typically say, well, we're going to go mixed methods?
No.
Because you gotta know what the question is, right?
Yeah.
Like this is like immediately like, why do we need it, right? It's great. It makes it really interesting and it's powerful. But if you have a really straightforward question that you just need a large survey sample for, then what else is going on there? Yeah. So I think, again, it's maybe it happens later on. You might think you don't need mixed methods right in the beginning, and that could change. But I would never just say we have to do a mixed methods approach just to do it.
I mean, I think part of the gift of sitting on the studio team is that we work with clients who are at various parts of their process.
Yeah.
And so depending on where you are on the process, what work you've done already and what work you haven't done, it helps to evaluate kind of if it's necessary. And often the answer is no.
Yeah.
Dscout has a diary tool, but that's not always 100% of the time the right method. You might only want to do a quantitative study. And you can be making things more complicated if the data won't necessarily align beautifully at the end. You want to make sure that when you're mixing methods, it's with intention and it's data that complement each other rather than contradict each other, or complicate the picture more than the questions you're already starting out with.
Right. Or be prepared to do more. If you have contradictions, right?
Yeah.
So that could be a goal, right? But then you're going to have that is definitely extending and making it more complicated.
That's why the endless resources is hard, because I could spin my wheels all day.
Moving, right? You can spend your money. Yeah, that's not a problem.
And time. Man, what a dream.
Another iteration. And so I wonder, we're having some questions about not such the method, like survey usability, the level up of like, you want to evaluate a thing. You want to explore the space or potential for a new product line, or you want to discover more about your users. Is there a fit with mixed methods in those buckets that you found historically? Like, I really like using mixed methods or multi-method approach when I'm, exploring users more broadly, like trying to understand what it means to be in a family in 2020, or understanding one's gender identity, or how I exercise my right to blank. These stickier, more ambiguous concepts that might not be fully answered, quote unquote, in a survey. Are there buckets of like broad types of questions, exploratory, discovery, evaluative, that are better suited? You found with mixed methods.
I mean, I think there's kind of, I often think about it like, are you starting with a what or when, or like, is it a pattern? Are you looking then to go from kind of this quantitative to a more qualitative approach, which I think tends to be a lot of folks kind of in the field, right? So you're looking at like, what are the patterns that I want to then be able to dig into further, right? So I think there's kind of like, what are the levels of trust people might have, or what different types of groups think this, right? And then you want to move into kind of, why do people follow this order or this search process, or what causes them to turn off notifications at that moment, or how does feeling lonely affect your use of the app, right? So I think this is where there's kind of, you can imagine a larger question about what's the role of tech in people's lives is a huge question. So you're going to have research questions that really target different aspects of that go back to, I think, Roz's point of like really finding a more satisfying answer, but not necessarily contradicting each other.
Yeah, and I'll lead with qual if I put paper to pen and I don't necessarily know all the quantitative items I would even want to put in front of people that would give me helpful information. I'm like, man, I need to lead with some qual, understand this landscape, get an idea for what's out there and where people's heads are at. And then I can help and like validate those things with a larger sample. The flip side is, if I have those measures, I run a big quant study and I'm like, wow, I didn't expect this outcome. Then I'll flip back to qual and say like, where did this come from? Why did you answer this way? To get some more nuance on it.
And to your point about unlimited resources, it sounds like then you would go back to a survey to then check those. You're in my background. We're never done, right?
It's never done.
You run a 10-year study and it just gives you 10 more years worth of studies and questions, which is both frustrating and part of why you're in it. We have a lot of folks who are asking about kind of specific things that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So folks, we have a case later that we're going to be running through that I think will answer some of your questions around, examples. And then we have a lot of questions about, I'm a small team, how do I get started? So don't worry, folks, we will get to those questions. I want to first, however, talk through some what I'm calling modern mixes. So these are best practices or wins that you've had, and you've alluded to some of them when you're starting with a broad survey and you see things and then you're going into interview. Can you talk about some of the nice mixes that you've got that have combined well?
Yeah, go for it.
So I did one around with working, our client was a free healthcare clinic, and they needed to know they wanted to know who was using their services, but more importantly, they wanted to get at non-users, which is for any researcher is really tough. How do you capture who's not using your product, your service, or coming through your door, right? And so we did a large survey of every single patient they had, but then we also noticed that we wanted to make sure it was really we are connecting to understanding what they needed from their current patients to get at who might be in their networks that's not currently using the service, right? And so we then did cognitive interviewing, or following up on that survey, going back through some really eloquent patients to ask them, what were you thinking about when you were taking this survey here? How did you think about stigma, or what was kind of the role of that for you in seeking out free healthcare services, right? So this kind of helped us dig into that we really needed more interviews, which was expensive. And we did not initially have that on our kind of research agenda. We're working with a small nonprofit agency. We were a team of 3 researchers. So we were like, okay, how are we going to determine kind of who to target? And so we really got a lot of information from that cognitive interview, asking them, what did they think we should be really asking about to people in the community. So then we knew how to target very specifically, doing focus groups with kind of the most in need population, that what we were capturing that gap or who they were missing. So that was a really effective use that we didn't plan on initially for a mixed methods approach.
And by cognitive interviewing, briefly, you
right.
mean?
So typically it's used when you're having some kind of survey and you want to then understand the actual participants' understanding or their interpretation of the questions you have, right? So you are interviewing them about the survey. It's a very meta moment.
Yeah.
I think researchers love it. And folks, you kind of explain to them, I just want to know more and make sure that I'm getting it right, is really the way I usually frame it to people that I'm talking to. And I think most people are frustrated when they're taking the survey, right? They're kind of in between 2 categories, or they're not quite sure what you mean by a certain question. So I think it's a very effective way, and I found really a lot of success with that in getting kind of to tricky or sticky things.
Roz, do you have any, and I know this is a challenging question because it is so question dependent.
Yeah.
Your best mix is the one you just used to answer the question.
Exactly.
We had an event here this week with women in product, and we had some brilliant product managers up on stage talking about how, again, folks who, as a product manager, aren't typically doing research, but they're working with and maybe collaborating with researchers. And someone in the crowd asked, how do you make the space for research when you don't know what research you might need? You might not know the questions that you're going to get from, building this thing and shipping. Dscout has a value of ship and learn. I think many of you out there have similar, just get some product or something in the hands of the users. And then you find, we need to actually learn more about. One of the product managers said, though, that she builds in sort of some research time. And it's I don't know what method we're going to use, but I know we're likely going to need something. And it sounds like cognitive interviewing is part of that. We know we want to do a great big survey. However, let's build in some time. And again, thinking about if you're on a small team, you can advocate for this method with your client, saying it will give you a better, again, they're probably focused on a method that they're bringing in. We want a great big survey, tons and tons of data from non-users. And you can go, we're going to definitely do that. However, it's going to be better, it's going to be much better if we use a cognitive interview, do some observational studies, use a focus group. So if you're someone out there who's saying I've advocated for mixed methods and I'm banging my head against a wall, use some cognitive judo to say, what your client wants. They've likely said it in pretty plain terms. How can you use not just a qualitative method, but how can you use a method they're not thinking about to support the method they really want?
Yeah.
Right. You lead with kind of the end result, what are the insights you'll get out of this, and then walk it backwards in terms of the best way of getting there.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
But no, you just be able to leverage it more then as well, right? So this is it's going to be more satisfying in the end, I think, for them.
is there innovation is the worst, innovative is the worst adjective that I can think of, but it's the only one.
Yeah.
Thinking about like the things you've thrown together. Can you give me a sort of creative or unexpected mix that really worked well? For those of you out there, the studio is, I mean, there are like our skunk works. I mean, we give them the time and the freedom. Like, you've shipped foam products to people for them to build, like when you didn't have something, or like you've asked them to like draw things. Like,
yep, we've recently shipped a bunch of lucite blocks out to scouts to get their sense for kind of in their world where it would be helpful for them to have a tool that would help them with day-to-day activities. And so it was this kind of like random form. I think it was actually a picture frame from Amazon that served as this lucite block, just to think about in their worlds, to get creative and pain points that this fake tool might be able to help with.
Yeah, just for those of our listeners out there who might be pressing against stakeholders externally or internally who don't quite know what qual is, who think of it as interviewing. I mean, the three of us are advocating for these sort of like, I mean, obviously we're at Dscout, so remote methodologies are always top of mind for us. But I mean, think about how much you could get if, I mean, we built a wearable, or we gave scouts something that they could build their own wearable because the customer didn't know exactly if they wanted to or what that thing might look like. We had scouts making necklaces and glasses and watches and bracelets. And
for sure.
I mean, our team wouldn't have thought of those. I mean, I guess we could have spun our wheels, but much better to have the would-be users figure that stuff out. You know?
Yes.
So if you're out there, challenge yourself and your team to think beyond interviews and focus groups are no doubt imperative, but like, and studio goes out and visits folks plenty, and observational studies are wonderful. And there are ways you can challenge your participants, your would-be users, to think more creatively. And I don't know if that's bubbling up anything else.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, we'll do a lot of journey mapping, and my favorite part of every project is the moment where we have the participant actually map their own journey out and take a picture of it and share it with us, and the things that they're able to communicate. And no skill set of like artistry is needed. Like the things that they're able to communicate with us in that snapshot could not be measured in a quantitative study. It's really, it's special. And participants are excited to share their viewpoints. So speaking to that kind of stakeholder who maybe doesn't know where they're trying to get, sometimes doing the work and showing them the value that they'll get out of it is the best way to kind of get their buy-in for future studies.
Yeah, it's another kind of data too, that it's not necessarily tied to being verbal. So it's some kind of spatial representation that matters to them. So I think that's kind of a way for different kind of scouts or participants to engage. That might not be maybe as expressive verbally, but then they can really kind of be very detailed, intricate maps, or use software to produce things that we never thought they would, right? To kind of formalize what they're thinking about.
And to that point, I have some of our customers report to and work with engineers who, again, have a different worldview. They're working on different questions and problems day to day. Giving some of our customers, we ask them like, well, why don't we just ask screenshots? We'll just get hundreds and hundreds of screenshots of what's going on in moments of bliss and dread. And we have, stakeholders who then just share them out with the engineering team. Here are 25 images of the worst moment in the last week using this app or service. And it's great for engineers and designers to say, like, oh, it's that page that we thought was working really well. Like, our back-end data wasn't showing us any latencies or any error messages, because users are kind of resilient, and so they're just, forging through. But as researchers, it's our job to like, no, let's pull on that. Let's pull on why this particular screen or this part of the experience isn't working.
Yeah.
And to your point, Casey, like the visual data speaks wonders when you can put it in front of a builder and say, well, it's this. Yeah. Most people are saying this is really not good. And here are the words they're using to describe that particular screen's experience. So
I ran a workshop earlier this week with one of our customers, and it was a room of engineers that we were working with, which is always like such a fun group. And they all were so bought in and proud of what they had built, which is awesome. And it was a great foundation, but there were some real pain points for users as they navigated through it. And our ability to kind of create materials, get them on the platform, have them watching videos, and seeing from the user's perspective kind of what their reactions were. Number-minded people, seeing that qualitative work, it really flipped the coin, I think, and they walked out excited and motivated to make the changes that they needed. So
and we're
very cool.
Sorry about that, Ross. Yeah, we're hearing so much from folks who are, again, I'm seeing we have 24 questions, which
dang, sorry.
No, it's
we're
awesome.
talking too much.
Thanks so much, y'all, for the engagement. I love it when y'all are motivated and engaged and interested in the topic. I wish we had many, many more hours. Many of you are working out small teams, and we've been hearing and writing about democratization and finding like cross-team collaborators. I promise we will get to it. I keep teasing it like an ESPN. Next, we'll talk about live. But
oh my gosh.
Before we get to it, I wanted to talk about a project we did internally, and not just this, but we can talk about others. But this one in particular leveraged the experience and the expertise of both Roz's background and Casey's to make for what we thought was a really compelling piece. So Zoe City, that's right, another nickname, Zoe City. Zoe, my colleague and compatriot, will drop the link for this. Tech and Us was a big project we did. We worked with a lot of digital companies, folks who are interested in media broadly, and I was hoping we could use this to sort of spin up how we, Dscout, or Studio specifically, answered some questions in a mixed methods way. So I don't know if you want to give like a quick rundown.
Let's do it. So we ran this work last summer. It definitely was asking, well, we knew that we had an interest in studying kind of big technology companies and how people felt about them, but we didn't go into it totally sure about exactly what areas we wanted to dig into. So we ran a diary study and learned a lot from participants that they're super interested in how trustworthy they are, how their big tech companies are regulated. And so we built a quantitative instrument out of that to run against a large non-probability-based sample to see, kind of to validate what we were seeing in the qualitative work. We got that data back and we were like, man, what are we seeing? People are super positive. And, you know, about big tech companies. Okay. And we were like, didn't expect this. We expect some positivity, but not to the extent at which we saw it. Yeah. So coming from my really annoying, super quant-heavy background where I worked with probability samples, I'm like, guys, let's think about the sample composition. We surveyed internet-only households. Like, obviously, they're going to be more excited about tech. We got to fix this. Go to a probability-based sample with non-internet households, see what those rural non-internet users are doing, and let's see how it impacts our findings. Reran the work quantitatively once again, and our findings barely changed. We really saw that people overwhelmingly are fairly positive about big tech companies. While they want some things to change in terms of how they're regulated and different social responsibilities that might be associated with them, they were really excited. So we went back to qualitative, ran another diary study, and we said, hey, this is what we found from this work that we've run. We want to run a few concepts past you to like understand how if our perspective and what we're getting from this data, how you feel about it. And we had some participants kind of poke holes in that framework. And so, you know, I think that a study is successful whether you have big findings, like revolutionary findings or not. This was definitely an example of, we didn't necessarily go into it planning to have so many stages of data collection, but what came out of it was like a lot of learnings for us, and definitely that ebb and flow, kind of on your toes. We had that initial qualitative, quantitative pair planned. We did not have the subsequent add-on quantitative and qualitative work planned, and yeah, it was pretty cool. A lot of fun.
Yeah, and you were doing this fairly quickly.
Oh yeah, this was over probably 2 or 3 weeks. We had this really fun guy, Ben from People Nerds, who really wanted us to get our findings together.
Oh boy, yeah, I do remember. The confirmation, like similar background to Roz. Actually, the three of us all have similar background. The confirmation of, or rather, the non-statistical significance, and just like, well, there's nothing. I mean, there is, but there are differences or changes that we thought. And I think it's, for me, reflecting on it now, it was a smushed like design thinking innovation sprint.
Totally.
Just like you said, we had the qual-quant pairing that we really thought was going to tell us like, okay, we'll see a bunch of negative attitudes in the quant, and then we'll dive deeper with some folks on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, and we'll jump in to see like what are those moments and what really resonates. Didn't see anything, or rather saw something we were unexpected.
Right.
Ran another survey and then another qual, and we were sharper, or you all were much sharper in what you could ask and when. And so,
sure. The picture was much clearer.
Exactly. Triangulation.
Yeah, so, for sure. And this happens with our customers all the time too. Like, we'll go out set to do a specific diary project and we'll realize like, man, we really need to get some IDIs in here. Like there's something more to be said in this effort. And so I think it's if I'm talking unlimited resources, I think it's the kind of the fun, unexpected stuff that makes those unlimited resources worth it.
Certainly.
But it highlights how quick you could also do that, right? There's a sense that you're always kind of having to do a long, drawn-out process. And this was like, I mean, it's a lot of kind of human power in that time period, but I think it is something that you can see it's much more kind of robust in a quick period of time.
Yeah, and this is a nice lead into what we'll finish with, folks. I promised it to you all day. We're going to now talk about how you can start some of the stuff that we've been talking about. I know that we're going to talk about leveraging your partners internally and externally, setting expectations for your stakeholders, and how, again, those of you who are more qualitatively minded, you know that like you don't want to do 100 IDIs. You want to do, depending on if you're aligning them with a persona or with a product line, you may have a specific number, or if you're doing geographically, you need certain households. But like 5 to 10 IDIs with a big data set, man, after like the first 3, I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to run another 2 more surveys that focus in on something I had no idea. And so what can each of you start talking a bit about how folks get started? Let's start with internally. You're at a big or small place, and you need to start building some bridges.
I mean, real talk.
That's a real talk.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I remember the moment. I was initially a qualitative researcher, and I remember the moment in grad school where they were like, "Yeah, but you got to put some numbers to that," and it hurt my soul. And after learning quantitative work, I'm kind of like, okay. I thought I was such a qualitative diehard. I learned quantitative work. I appreciate them both. And I've kind of just become a champion of like, anyone can learn how to do these things.
Yes.
I think researchers, and as a researcher myself, view ourselves pretty highly. And while we do have lots to contribute to an organization, when you don't have a big team and you want to kind of share the love of research, there are lots of people who can learn some fundamentals on qualitative and quantitative work and get their hands dirty. The more people who are thinking with a researcher mindset, even if they're not actually running work, in their day-to-day, they're infusing those things in what they're doing. And in organizations that silo people into you are only quantitative, you are only qualitative, you're kind of creating gaps in the work that they're approaching, the way that they explore research. There's no triangulation going on. And so there can be some really big holes in what you're doing. And so I feel like organizations, even a researcher team of 1 or none, can really empower people to start thinking about these like experimentations, bringing creativity to the work they're doing, to better understand users. And in the end, it'll give you more like reliable data because you're thinking about it with a bigger lens.
Right. I think there's like such an important point of like not being precious, right? It's like it's not only like you have to be an expert, you have to know every single part of one methodology. You only do qual, you only do quant, right?
Totally.
I think there's also something that I found, like people have searched what you have on LinkedIn or what you have on a random website you forgot that even existed anymore, that you did some project 10 years ago, right? So you have some inkling of what that might look like, and you can quickly refresh some of those skills. So I think there's a lot of times where we have to feel like you have to have all this experience, and before you can even say you're interested in participating in this one project together.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's where I've been found by folks where I'm like, I don't remember that. I published that article 5 years ago. And so it was really done 7 or 8 years ago, but this is something that you have experience with. Right?
Yeah.
And so you could go back to kind of doing deep, like ethnographic work, right? Even after all of your quantitative kind of expertise, right? And I think that's where just being willing to be more vulnerable and saying like, it's been a little while, but I don't need to be precious. I don't need to be perfect, right? And that we can really engage in these questions together and teach each other while we're doing the project. Because let's be honest, that's what you learn. Every kind of project brings with it new issues that come up, new methodologies you have to kind of tweak. Right, that I think is really powerful of getting started, of like there's not a perfect starting point.
Totally. And those of us that are in this conversation right now, like we are truly people nerds. We are excessively socially aware most of the time. And
we try.
We have imposter syndrome. Like if I am a trained quantitative researcher, it can be really scared to dip your toes into the qualitative pool. Yeah. And by encouraging those things, I read this awesome article about an organization that actually has like all of their qualitative and quantitative researchers sitting on the same team with the same titles without like big distinctions between who they are. Like that's a world in which you can get to collaborate, you can get to experiment. It's okay to fail and learn from it and try out different methods. So that's
Yeah.
our pedestal.
Yeah, it is really important. I mean, the iterative, we're going to be talking next on People Nerds about iterative rolling research, so stay tuned for more information on that.
Yeah.
How you can build these practices where it's like, let's just get out and do some,
Yeah.
let's just do some research. Let's
Yeah.
just ask some questions and get some answers.
Yeah.
We have a lot of folks asking questions about convincing or persuading stakeholders.
Mhm.
So let's say, I mean, when the two of you have worked with many customers, again, in different parts of organizations with different levels of expertise and knowledge about research. I'm using air quotes here,
Yeah.
what research means. How do you persuade or convince them to allow within the work something that's qualitative or quantitative or just mixed in its approach?
I mean, some success I've had was kind of like, what are you really concerned about? Or what's the, like, is it kind of getting an increased budget line, right? In terms of thinking about like who your stakeholder is, who are they reporting to, or what's the larger context in which they're operating? Because thinking about then like, well, how can that research help you get to that bottom line faster or more effectively? I think really helps make that concrete, right? In terms of their problems, not coming in with my own, like, here's the perfect research agenda that I would do, particularly as like a former recovering academic, right? That is a tricky kind of balance, but it is something I've really learned a lot from Roz and members in the studio of thinking about, like, we need to really meet our stakeholders where they're at, right? And help them address and look good in front of their own community of the broader stakeholders they're reporting back to.
Yeah, and in identifying that bottom line, you're like definitely aiming to accomplish whatever goal they have set out and maybe push the line a little bit more, share a little bit extra that they didn't know that they were looking for. But with your researcher brain, you can read between the lines and add that offering. And then it sounds silly, but also the delivery of the insights, I think, makes a huge difference. Having a compelling storyline, including multimedia as best you can, getting the actual voice of the customer behind really can have more impact than you would expect, and can open the door for continuing work like that in the future. Right.
Yeah, one of this great product manager group, Women in Product, they're a meetup based in San Fran, but they have chapters all over the US. Check them out, doing some really killer work. Another product manager was saying how she gets a lot of pushback. They're like, let's just ship. Everything just get in users' hands. And she is a design thinker and researcher, and so she doesn't call it research. This is Autumn Schultz. Shout out to Autumn. She says it's early optimization is what she calls it. So I know we have a lot of folks who are saying that they're reporting to, again, PMs, engineers, folks who are more technically minded. They just want to, okay, there's a problem, let me build it, let me ship and learn. She makes the case that, well, yes, but you don't want to do all these engineering hours in this sprint only to have to redo it again 2 sprints later. Why not take 4 days or a week? Let me do some like light touch work that involves, an interview, a focus group, or, launching you can do this with a Google form or ask people to email you screenshots. You can be really scrappy with it.
For sure.
And then that can make for such a much more informed roadmap. And so you might have to call it something else is what I'm saying. You might not be able to say mixed hybrid or multi-research. You may have to get some business idioms out there. Early optimization is one.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
Folks are thinking about. Well, we have lots of other questions related to, again, stakeholder pushback, convincing data scientists to work with you. I think one of the theses that we've got here, if I can be so bold, is that there's a lot of misconceptions about, it sounds like most of you out there are qualitatively minded, working with folks who may be more quantitatively minded. So let's take that case specifically. You have someone who just give me the numbers, just give me the frequencies on, just tell me the what is. What are some of the phrases, we've touched on them, but what are some of the things that you've done historically or have learned yourself in bolstering Qual's role at the quant table?
Yeah. I ask a lot of questions about what was unexpected in their findings. So you ran a bunch of these frequencies and whatever regressions that you are putting together, like what popped that you wouldn't have anticipated? Oh, interesting. Why do you think that is? Oh, well, have you considered these angles of it? Wouldn't it be a cool add-on to go to users of this particular group and get a better understanding of why that's happening? I think sometimes in quantitative, it can be really easy to overlook that like small subset of people who have something different going on, but that can actually be a really impactful part of the people that you're serving. So yeah, I'm a question asker.
Yes, I think a lot of questions and kind of figuring out like how can you maximize on that group, right?
Yep.
And make that really kind of leverage to like how else are you going to explain what's going on here,
Yep.
right? It's going to be very kind of not satisfying if you just present these are certain patterns, and then everyone inevitably asks, why is that happening? How can we make that better? What is it going to look like in kind of 2 years from now, right? So I think there's a sense around like, how do we really blow that out for a further narrative?
Yeah.
And you kind of are left short often when you just have a close-ended, survey item, even if it's of, thousands of people.
Yeah. But to our point earlier that mixed methods isn't always the best approach.
Right.
If the answer to that question of what was unexpected and they say, oh, this thing, but that's not a group that we're looking to include in this future work, then it's a time to back off. I feel like pushing your agenda on whatever research is to come doesn't give you that kind of like continued legitimacy as an expert consulting on it.
Right. Yeah, there are boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Around like it's not always going to be the best tool.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of other questions about speed, which is another misnomer. That doing research right, quote unquote, sometimes very often bumps up against, well, we have this roadmap or we have this timeline or, the executive team is meeting on this day and that's when they're meeting.
Yeah.
And so shameless plug, that's when a tool like Dscout, which is smartphone based, can help you. But again, leverage the media, leverage the tools out there, Facebook polls or jump into a Slack community. You can be scrappy if, again, it's sort of just in time insights. You've got your quant, let's say, but you need some qual. I don't know, leave your office, go to I studied flirting as part of my academic research. So I was in bars and restaurants and I was literally that guy. Hey, I just saw you talk to someone.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
And you may, again, only be able to talk to 3 people, but it will hone you in on some things that will allow you to say to the leadership group or the executive team, but actually what I'm hearing is this. And yes, they're going to ask you sample size. But drive the customer centricity, which is good business, and making fans of your users, which is good business. Be scrappy.
Yeah. Neither quant nor qual has a insights button in which magically emerge your findings.
Boy. Yes.
As much as I would be interested to see one. Picking the right tool, Dscout or otherwise, not just the vehicle in which you're collecting your data, but different menuing that you have available to you to kind of help sum things up, word clouds of that sort, super helpful. And I think also being thoughtful about your sample. So if I know that I don't have a ton of time to look at my data, I'm not going to do a qualitative study of 200 people. I will only feel bad. I probably won't get that much out of it. I won't make it through all the data. I would focus in, as you said, Ben, and pick a sample of 30 and really dig into what I'm seeing with them.
Mm-hmm.
Get a sense for the landscape to at least have that initial conversation and maybe pursue more research after that.
Yeah, and you all do very vigorous research briefs with timelines as to what you're going to do when. I would encourage you to do that with your clients and stakeholders, both internally and externally.
Yep.
Advocate for the methods you want to do. Append KPIs or to discuss how that nature will help further methods. There's been some questions about what are lists of mixed methods. My colleague Zoe just chatted an IDEO design kit, which is this great big group of methods that are both qualitative and quantitative. They hew more qualitative because, Roz and I will have to get on a subsequent webinar. We'll just talk correlation, regression, Z-T tests. We'll do structural equation modeling.
Let's do it.
For the 2% of you out there who are like, yes, do that, yes! Well, we'll look forward to having you. But yeah, check out that IDEO design kit. You're looking to answer questions. Don't be too prescriptive in which method is best. It's just like, Roz and Casey have been saying, start with the question or start with what you're hoping to do. What's the action? Is it you're trying to iterate on a feature? Are you trying to understand whether or not you need to turn something off? Are you trying to get into wearables? Are you trying to become a brand? Start with that question and then your methods should follow. And as they've said, partner with folks. Lean into the folks that you have in the office who, again, may not have research in their title, but are folks who are trained in asking questions and seeking solutions. So thank you again. We're running low on time. I know we've got a lot of questions left. We'll have to follow up with Roz and Casey, but is there any lasting words on mixed methods that we didn't get to, something you want to leave our audience with?
I would just say not to be scared to try them out. Again, speaking to that idea, the imposter syndrome, truly experiment. Even if you don't initially have findings, You'll learn from the opportunity and eventually be able to find the synergy between methods that really works for you and what your business questions are. That's my biggest thing. I think there's a line in the sand for actually no reason, and we could do a much better job of having open conversations about blending our approaches.
Yeah, and I think there's something around, it's not just the team that you're on right now, but the teams you've been on in the past, who you know, kind of other researchers, a broader community of not being precious and kind of being vulnerable and saying, like, this is something I really want to know more about. I've seen you've done a lot of work in this area. Can we chat about it? Like, what was some things that, you know, having more of a one-on-one with them about their process can really be a helpful resource. Like, I constantly am asking folks, like, I know you published this, you know, you did this work last year, you have this big project. How can I kind of learn from that, the general insights, not obviously the content, right?
Yeah.
But like thinking about what are the best ways to move forward. You have a broader team than just the one you're actually employed by.
Right. And last year I had an opportunity to speak with the head of research at Airbnb, Judd Anton, and I asked him, so are you hiring more qualitative people? Are you hiring more quantitative people? And he said, I eschew that entire mix. Now, granted, he's a person who can, you know, say something that's rather like out there because he's leading a team, but he's leading a team of smart Airbnbers working on a really thorny problem. And he said, I'm not hiring qualitative and I'm not hiring quantitative. In fact, I don't want to hire either of those people. I want people who are like flexible and are interested in end goals, are collaborators. He kept stressing how at Airbnb we can't hire silos. We need to hire people who are going to break through the lanes. And granted, Airbnb is a place where he might be able to do that. But if you're out there thinking like, everything's really siloed, just reach out, you know, challenge yourself to both. I mean, there's a lot of methods that you can quickly spin up and learn that, again, as we've said, don't need to be precious and perfect. But if you do a few interviews and you pair it with a small survey, man, there you go. You're a mixed methodologist. Welcome to the club. So, you know, I know that we can be really, I like that I have a PhD, Roz has a master's, Casey has a PhD. Like, we enjoy these titles that we worked hard to earn. And along the way, I wish I didn't have to pick a lane, at least methodologically. Right. Because whenever I met with somebody who, at least in my case, was doing qual, I was like, oh, that's so cool. I wish I would have, you know, interviewed people about flirting and hookups instead of just surveying. So press yourselves to see the question or the potential solution from different angles. And I think that'll go a long way. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Roz and Casey's contact info. They have been generous enough to offer their inbox time. If there's something that you want to holler at them about, please do so. I'm Ben at Dscout. I'm always happy to receive emails. I know that I email many of you each week. Today you'll actually be getting another one. So thanks for subscribing to People Nerds. Subscribe if you haven't already. Tell your friends about People Nerds. Roz, Casey, thank you so very much.
Thank you. This was fun.
It was a great pleasure to chat for a little bit.
It's been real, guys. Thanks for having us.
Be well, y'all, and we'll talk soon.